It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Millzy, back on the Hometown Commander, and we are back for another episode of Millzy Bros. Millzy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 of the deck of the Commander in front of us on my quest to outbrew your favorite Magic channel. Yesterday, we talked about my attempt to upgrade the Elven Council Precon from Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle-earth. But today I wanted to take a shot at Galadriel of Lothlórien. This is the Scry Galadriel from the main set. And I just wanted to see how elves would change if we leaned a little bit more into the scrying and had some fun. So let's do it. Galadriel of Lothlórien is a 3-mana 3/3 elf noble. It says whenever the ring tempts you, if you choose a creature other than Galadriel as your ring bearer, you scry 3. Okay, well, scrying 3 is actually pretty great. Hopefully we can take advantage of that, and believe me, we plan to. And then whenever you scry, you may reveal the top card of your library. If a land card was revealed this way, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Okay, so the first ability can give us a free scry 3 if we get tempted by the ring and we pick something other than Galadriel. We have a little bit of that in the deck, but what we really want to do is focus on the bottom one. So this is whenever you scry, you may reveal the top card of your library. If a land card is revealed this way, put it onto the battlefield tapped. So the big thing about this ability is going to be that we can take advantage of an ability like this in a couple different ways. Of course, we want a bunch of things that are going to scry, and that's the goal. We're going to scry a ton. That's the goal of the deck. But the way my understanding of how this works, and I'm going to get this out of the way right away because I built the deck this way, and if this ruling is wrong, then I think some of the deck changes. But let's say I play a card, say I play a card like Preordain, okay? It's a scry 2 and then draw a card. Okay, so the way that I think Galadriel's trigger is going to work is when I play Preordain, I have to resolve all of the things on Preordain, scry 2 and then draw a card, and then Galadriel's ability would go off. So the interesting part of Preordain would be if I scry 2 and I get a land and a card that I want, I put the card I want on top, the land's second down, I finish resolving Preordain by drawing a card, then Galadriel would go off because I scried, then I reveal that land off the top. I put it on the battlefield tapped. That's my understanding of how the effect works. Now, a lot of my scry effects aren't working like that. They're just a bunch of, scry 2, scry 3, scry 4, and then we would just put the land on top and reveal it. But my understanding of a spell like Preordain is we would finish resolving it and then do its effect. That's only relevant for a few effects, but I just wanted to make sure that we get that out of the way because there's a couple cards in here where I've kind of done it that way because that's my understanding of how it works. But getting into that, let's get into our land base. Our land base looks pretty darn cool. We got a reprint of Minimo, School at Water's Edge. This is for blue. We can untap target legendary permanent. Like we talked about in our precon deck yesterday, this is great for something like Marwyn, where we can use this to untap Marwyn and then just get a bunch more green mana if we want to. Castle Vantress and Rivendell feel really cool in a deck like this because both of them scry 2, and then we can put a land on top and get that land for free. Rivendell does it for 2 mana. Castle Vantress does it for 4 mana. Now, the only caveat to Rivendell is we have to have a legendary creature to do it for 2 mana, but you think about we kind of want to, right? Because Galadriel needs to be out for when we scry to get that ability. So I like Rivendell. It fits really well with a lot of the, a lot of that idea of the elves. And so pretty cool mana base. And again, it's a Simic mana base, so we can get lots of we can use lots of basic lands because they do a lot of great things for us. I'm playing Snow Basics for a couple cards when we get up top. As you can see, the Snow Basics did not affect the bottom line of our deck very much. Getting up into the enchantments, Crossroads, we're going to take big turns with lots of mana. We want to make sure all of our creatures can be used the turn we come down. And then we can get in for good damage. Elven Chorus seems like a new interesting card. We can look at the top card at any time. We can cast creatures from the top, and then creatures can tap for mana of any color. Now, a lot of our elves can tap for mana for themselves, but I like this mainly for any tokens we make or any other things we make. They can tap for mana for themselves. Garruk's Uprising, going to give all of our creatures trample, and then if a creature's power 4 or greater comes in, we get to draw a card. This is kind of I'll run on this elemental bond type effect. We're not playing elemental bond, but we are playing tribute to the world tree, which is very similar. It says whenever a creature enters the battlefield you control, draw a card if its power is 3 or greater. That's elemental bond's effect, but we're adding on otherwise put 2+1/+1 counters on it. That's pretty great because we're trying to pair this and some other +1/+1 effects with Simic Ascendancy. So like our precon upgrade yesterday, Simic Elves is going to be another win con for our deck because we're going to make a ton of mana. We can put counters on our creatures with Simic Ascendancy, but Simic Ascendancy says whenever a counter gets put on our creature, we put a growth counter on Simic Ascendancy. At the beginning of our upkeep, if we have 20 or more growth counters on Simic Ascendancy, we win the game. Well, this is just another way. If we have a ton of mana, put a ton of counters on creatures, and then Simic Ascendancy can win us the game. And the cool part is we can put those counters on at instant speed. So we make enough green mana and enough blue mana, put a bunch of counters on creatures, and we could end the game that way. Guardian Project, here's one of our classic elf cards. Whenever a non-token creature comes in, as long as it has a name different than any other creature we control, which is kind of how Commander works. We're not supposed to have creatures that share names with other cards in our deck. That's kind of how the deck building restriction works, right? We get to draw a card, so that's great. That's what we're trying to do. Lost Owl Calling, here's a fun new card from Lord of the Rings. It says whenever you scry, you put a counter on Lost Owl Calling, and then for 6 mana, we can draw a card for each verse counter that was on it after we exile it, and then if it had 7 or more counters on it, we take an extra turn, and we can only do that as sorcery. This seems great. We scry, we put the counters on it, pay off that for turns later. Omen of the Sea, when it comes in, we scry 2 and draw a card. Well, that's great. That helps with our Galadriel effect. And then 2 and a blue, we can sack it and scry 2 again. So this is great because not only are we scrying 2 once, we're actually going to scry 2 twice. For Cheetah Coralham, this is interesting because this is kind of a repeatable scry. Whenever a land comes in, we choose 1, tap or untap creature, and scry 1. This is almost does double duty in the deck because it can just scry. We need it to just scry, right? But it can also tap or untap a creature, meaning it can untap some of our elves that tap for mana, and that seems really good in a deck like this, especially when all of our elves make a ton of mana. Season of Growth, whenever one of our creature comes in, we scry 1. So with Galadriel out, this could potentially get us some free lands out of the battlefield. And then we cast a spell that targets a creature we don't control, or creature we control, we draw a card. That's not as important as the top one is. The top one's the main important effect there. We're going to try out Song of Arendelle, scry 2 and then draw 2. So that's kind of interesting. If my understanding of the way that Galadriel works, that kind of stings because we're just going to strike 2 and then probably draw the 2 cards we scried. But we could still reveal, and if it's a land, then it goes onto the battlefield. Number 2, create a treasure and get a bird. And then number 3, put a flying count on everything that doesn't have flying. That could help us again end the game because then all of our elves would have flying and they could potentially then attack, and our opponents may not have blockers for them. Sylvan Anthem. All of our green creatures get a flat 1/1, and then whenever a green creature enters the battlefield under our control, we scry 1. Well, here we go. We scry 1. If it's a land, then great, it's on the battlefield. If not, we keep it on top, and we can potentially draw it. Not playing a ton of artifacts because, again, our elves tap for a ton of mana. We're playing the Arcane Signet. We're playing the Coat of Arms. Again, I will talk up Coat of Arms as many times as, again, this is one of my favorite typal Wizard's new word for tribal. It's one of my favorite typo cards because you're just going to buff all your creatures up the wider you go, and elves are going to go super wide when it comes to creatures. So this is going to help us out. All we need is one little trample enabler to make this fun, or a flying enabler, or a trample enabler. There's plenty of ways to make Coat of Arms really good. And the Torpor Anchor feels great here. At the beginning of our upkeep, we scry 2, so that helps with Galadriel. Whenever you choose to put one or more cards in the bottom of your library while scrying, exile those cards from the bottom of your library. And this is during your turn, you may play cards exiled with the Temporal Anchor. What I think is interesting about a card like this is, so if we bottom something, we get to exile it and we can play it later. So sometimes in the game, you scry a card and you go, well, that's not good right now, but I don't want to draw it because it's not going to be good for a couple turns. What's best with the Temporal Anchor is you dump it on the bottom, you exile it, and then later you can play it. It seems really cool. This is a card that, of course, a lot of people loved for a deck like Elminster, where you're trying to draw and generate a ton of value, or scry and generate a ton of value. So I like the idea. I'm interested to see what the Temporal Anchor could do in a deck like this that cares a lot about scrying. Just a few instants, Beast Within gets a reprint with some cool art in the Precon. Growth Spiral, again, gets a reprint in the Elven Precon as well, so it feels really great to play that here. Same thing with Heroic Intervention. Joint Exploration, scry 2 and then draw, and if we pay the 3rd mana, we can put a land from our hand down on the battlefield. We could potentially get 2 lands out of this with Galadriel, again, if the top of our cards deck works the way we want it to. Pongify and Rapid Hybrid for some Destroy removal, and then Reality Shift for some exile removal. And then most of our spells are trying to get us to scry somehow. We have Cultivate, Farseek, Nature's Lore, Rampant Growth, and 3 visits for some straight ramp. Elven Farsight says scry 3 and then reveal the top. If it's a creature, draw a card. So This with Galadriel out could just end up being kind of odd, right? Because we'd have to do Elven Farsight first. So what we could do is Scry 3, put a creature on top, put a land second from the top. This card resolves. We see that creature and draw it. Then Galadriel would go off, sing the land second from the top, right? Or now the top card, and resolve and put it down. So that's not too bad. But I think 1 mana to Scry 3 and even get a land from Galadriel's effect is still going to be really good. Mystic Speculation, Scry 3, but for 3 mana we get it back into our hand. And that's pretty darn good. Scry 3, put the land on top, get it down. We're basically paying three mana for 1 land, but we're also looking at the rest of the cards that are coming. I like it. I think it's still good. The Stampede going to help us, again, end the game, give our creatures trample, and get a buff. Preordained, Scry 2 and draw a card. We talked about it already with Galadriel, but I think it's a pretty darn good card. Raise the Palisade seems great. One-sided kind of board wipe in a lot of ways. Choose a creature type, return all creatures that aren't that type to their hand. This seems really great. Bounce all the non-elves back to our opponent's hands, and hopefully that also could lead the way for a good elf attack to take out our opponents. Reason to Believe, on the reason side, Scry 3 for 1 blue mana. This feels great with Galadriel up, potentially get a land out of it. And then Believe, 5 mana, look at the top card of your library. You may put it on the battlefield if it's a creature card. If you don't, put it into your hand. So we may be able to already scry a ton and know what's on the top. And if it's a creature, we could put it down. But I see us more often than not just casting Reason off of this and probably never playing Believe unless we see a creature on top we really want and we don't mind paying the mana for it. Scour all possibilities, scry 2 and then draw a card, and we can flash it back if we want to. Serum Visions, draw a card, then scry 2, which is kind of interesting. Just a little play on the Preordained, just doing the opposite. And then, so that's our sorceries. Again, I'm kind of intrigued to see how things like these guys play, these little scry 2s. Can they get us enough value to scries on their own? If they don't, we do have things like Foresee that scries 4, Track Down that scries 3. So there's some other spells that scry for even more. So I think it's just going to come down to do the little scry 2s give us enough value? If not, take them out for those cards that scry 3 or scry 4. All right, we are playing a Planeswalker this time. We're playing Nissa, Steward of the Elements. Does scry 2 on the +2, so that's going to help with Galadriel. The 0, look at the top card. If it's a land or a creature with CMC or mana value less than or equal to the number of loads encounters on Nissa, you may put that card on the battlefield. So this can cheat our elves into play potentially as well. And then -6, we can untap some lands and make them creatures. Again, Nissa's here because it can scry 2 on the +2, and then the 0 could potentially, after we scry with another card, right, we would know what's on top. We could use Nissa to then cheat in that creature if we wanted to. But all right, let's go through our elves. You're probably going to notice a lot of the familiar hitters when it comes to elf decks, but we are playing a bunch of new elves as well from Lord of the Rings as well. Elsaurus Shepherd, a pretty classic elf finisher. It can't be countered. Green spells we control can't be countered. And then for 6 mana, we make all of our elves base toughness 5/5 that are also dinosaurs, and just makes them bigger, harder hitting, and potentially harder to block, or with a trample enabler, more damage to our opponents. Arwen and Damiel, whenever we scry, we put a counter on target creature, and for 6 mana, we can scry 2. Don't scoff at the 6 mana scry 2. We're probably going to, on some turns have so much extra mana that we probably could just, do a bunch of extra scry 2s and put some counters around. I like it. Arwen, Weaver of Hope, card I think is going to see play in a lot of elf decks. Whenever a creature we control enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters extra equal to its toughness. So the bigger Arwen is, the more counters that come in. We have lots of elves that buff other elves. So Arwen's just going to give all of our elves and all of our elf tokens coming in with extra counters. Again, this doesn't say non-token creature. So no matter what comes in, if it's an elf, it's going to, or any other creature, it's going to come in with counters. Beast Whisperer, drawing us a card. Whenever we cast creature spell, this is what elves are trying to do. Make mana, cast more elves, draw more cards, and Beast Whisperer helps us with that. Celeborn the Wise, whenever we attack with more elves, we scry 1, so this is going to help us with Galadriel's effect. And then whenever we scry ever, it gets +1/+1 on the turn for each card looking at it while scrying this way. This could potentially make Celeborn pretty big if we scry a bunch during our turn. Circle of Dreams, Druid, tapping for a green for each creature we control, makes us a ton of mana, and we love it. Elrond, Lord of Windell, whenever it or another creature enters the battlefield control, we scry 1. Well, that's great. At minimum with Galadriel, this could get us a ton of extra lands into play. And if this is the second time the ring tempts you, well, then that would trigger Galadriel's first ability. Well, I like this. Elrond seems to work really well with it. Elrond, Master of Healing, whenever you scry, put a +1/+1 counter on each up to X target creatures, where X is the number of cards looked at the way while you scry. This is no matter what. So I like Elrond. This one is basically a secondary commander for our deck with how much we're scrying. And whenever a creature you control the +1/+1 counter, it becomes the target of a spell or ability your opponent controls. You may draw a card. So I really like Elrond because Elrond's just going to start spreading those counters out. That works with the Simic Elves, but that also just pumps our board up. So I like Elrond. Again, the more we scry, the better. But he feels like a really great secondary commander to Galadriel for this scry thing we can do. I could see someone just making Elrond the commander of this deck. I think it does a very similar thing. You scry, you get the value that way. I could completely understand why someone might do that. I like the idea of the ramp from Galadriel a little more than I like Elrond's ability. Archfiend, Elvish Archdruid, +1/+1 all other elves, and then tap it for green for each elf you control. I love it. Elvish Champion, elves get +1/+1 in Forest Walk, so if our controller owns any land that has a forest type, they can't block. Again, a lot of green in Commander. I feel like more often than not, this is going to help us close out a game by just hitting the people that don't, that have forests, and then we can worry about the people who don't have forests later. The other cool part about Elvish Champion is we could pair this with a, Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, if we wanted to, which we are playing, to give everyone now has forests, so all of our elves are unblockable. Or remember cards like Dryad of Illusion and Grover, things that give all lands, all basic land types. Well, now they're forests, and now you can't be blocked by by all of our elves. So I really like Elvish Champion because it's another way for us to potentially end the game. Elvish Mariner. When we attack, we scry 1, but the even more cool effect is whenever we scry, we tap up to X target non-land permanents, where X is the number of cards looked at while scrying this way. This could also be really good because this could just tap down our opponent's creatures while we're scrying on our turn with our little effects, and then we could swing in for good value. So I like this elves, scrying thing because we keep seeing all these abilities that just take our scrying and make them be better. Elvish Mystic, 1 green mana comes down, taps for a green. Elvish War Master, whenever an elf comes in, we make a 1/1, it only goes off once per turn. But for 7 mana, all of our elves get +2/+2 and gain Death Touch. That's not bad, especially if we can pair that with Trample. Or if our opponents take a bunch of blocks, pay the 7 mana, give all our elves Death Touch, and take everything out. Zuri, one of the classic elf finishers, 5 mana can give all of our elves +3/+3 and trample, but for green mana, we can regenerate another elf we control. This pairs really well with cards like Elvish Archdruid, where we can tap that for every green for each elf we control. And then with Zuri, we can give everything else we control, regenerate every other elf we control. Yes, Zuri would die in that board wipe scenario, but we would save the rest of our elves, and I think it would end up being really well for us. Fyndhorn Elves, just like Llanowar, come down, 1 green mana, tap for a green. We're playing Galadriel, our precon commander in here. Everybody votes at start of combat if an elf can enter the battlefield under your control this turn. If Dominion gets more votes, we put a counter on our Ring Bearer. If Guidance gets more votes, we draw a card. We have a bunch of different ways to do some of the ring tempting, not as much. But Galadriel does tempt us as well. So this is great because it works with the first ability by not picking this Galadriel and then getting Scry 3 off of that, off of the not picking her. So you can see it kind of works a little bit. Glorfindrel, Dauntless Rescuer. Whenever you scry, choose 1, and it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. It must be blocked this turn if able, or it can't be blocked disabled by more than 1 creature. I think both of those are efficient depending on what you're doing. But again, you can make it big and say it can't be blocked by more than 1 creature and force your opponent to put something small in front of it. Or you say it has to be blocked, put it into the right opponent and maybe take something important. Like if someone only has just their commander out or whatever, you could force someone to block and take out a creature that way. Haldir, and whenever it comes in, we get X counters on it, where X is the amount we pay in the cost, and then 6 mana, other elves gain vigilance and +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter in Haldir. This is great because we already have a trample enabler, or we have a way to get them through in combat. This just adds more of a buff to all of our elves. Imperious Perfect, other elves get +1/+1, and we can tap for a green to get a token. Jiraga Tree Speaker, another fun, interesting elf, so we can level them up at any time during our main phase as a sorcery for 2 mana. When it's level 1 through 4, it just taps for 2 green mana, and when it gets to level 5, all of our elves tap for green mana. So if we have extra green mana, which we're going to in an elf deck, get this guy leveled up, get it up to 5, and now all of our elf tokens, everyone can tap for 5. Jiraga Warcaller is another cool elf that buffs up our squad. Whenever we cast it, We can kick it as many times as we want for 2 mana. It comes in with a +1/+1 counter on it for each time that was kicked, and then all of our other elves get +1/+1 for each counter on Warcaller. This is a great way to pump up our old board and get them in combat. Leaf Crown Visionary, other elves get +1/+1, and whenever we ever cast an elf spell, we can pay green if we do draw a card. Again, more value for us doing the things we already want to do. Legolas Greenleaf from the precon from Lord of the Rings can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Whenever another legendary creature enters the battlefield, we get a counter on Legolas, and then whenever he does come down to a player, we draw a card. So I like this, some interesting effects, not bad on a 2/2 body, and again, we have other ways to make it tap for a mana. We talked about Llanowar, Marwyn, probably one of the more classic, most well-known elves, both in their own right as a commander, and in elf decks. Whenever another elf comes in, we put a counter on Marwyn, and then she taps for green equal to her power. This is great because the more buffs we have out and the more things we have out, the more mana she taps for, and the more good we can do with that mana. Nissa, Resurgent Animus. This one is from Martian Machine, The Aftermath. The interesting part of this deck is I think this card, this card is carrying a ridiculous price point at the moment. You could probably take this out and make this deck even more budget than it is sitting right now. But whenever a land comes in, add a mana of any color, and then if this is the second time it resolved this turn, reveal cards on the top of your library until you hit an elf or elemental, put that card in your hand and put the rest on the bottom. So every time a land comes in, we get to add a mana of any color. This is great with Galadriel because those lands come and tap, so we'd still get a mana out of them. And then the second time, we get an elf off the top. Oracle of Moldiah. We can play an additional land in each of our terms, play with the top card of our library revealed, and we can play lands from the top of our library. So play an extra land on each of our turns. We can play them off the top. We can see the top card. Just a good card, and it's an elf. Priest of Titania, adding a green for each elf on the battlefield. Again, here's where we're taking real advantage of getting more and more green mana. Tadiova, whenever land comes in, we gain a life and draw a card. It's not an elf, but I feel like it fits this like slight landfall mechanic we have going on with the lands coming in. And hey, it could just help us churn through our deck even faster. And then Tireless Provisioner, getting us a food or a treasure every time a land comes in. We, of course, want that off of our... This is another way with Galadriel to turn that land coming in into mana, because we can make a treasure that we can use that turn, off of the land that comes in. Is this a perfect elf deck? No, by any means. Again, we're trying to scry and we're trying to play the elves at the same time. Again, the point of Millzy Brews is this is my version 1.0 list for this deck. This isn't any testing. I think every deck can always be better, and I think my experience with elf decks is growing. I'm not an elf expert by any means, but I think I learned a lot with elves from this deck and the precon yesterday, and trying to learn how to build elves, how to take advantage of elves, especially these color combinations. But let me know, what do you think of Galadriel of Lothlórien down? I almost said Lothlórien. Lothlórien down in the comments. Do you like the Scry elves? What could I have changed? What cards could I have added? There's a few I think I have in my head already that need to be changed. But I think that's the fun of deck building. You try, you iterate, you make your deck better, and you see where it goes. But I'd love to know what you think down in the comments. Like if you like the elf decks. Subscribe if you want to see some more Lord of the Rings content and more decks every week. Again, I'm trying to outbrew your favorite Magic channel, and Andrew's on that quest with me, and we just want to bury you in decks, bury you in the idea of deck building, having fun with it, and enjoying ourselves. But other than that, I will catch you guys next time.